Hey guys, this is Joe Harper with Reformed Truth Through Ministry. In today's video, we are going to be talking about Vikings in America. Today we're talking about some of the suppressed history of North America. We are talking about alternative views of anthropology and archaeology, and we are specifically pointing out the truths that the Vikings penetrated deep into the continent of North America centuries before the voyages of Christopher Columbus. So as I've been traveling across the country, I've gone to places like Iowa, I've gone to mounds in Minnesota and Wisconsin, and I went looking for copper mines in Michigan. In all of these destinations that I've gone, I have seen a thread of truths relating to our history, our archaeology, and our anthropology that has been suppressed by the mainstream archaeological establishment, by institutions such as the Smithsonian. And in today's video, that is no different. When I was in Michigan and I was studying the ancient copper mines in Michigan, I was looking for evidence of the fact that the Phoenicians they came to North America centuries before the voyage of Christopher Columbus, that they mined that copper in the ancient past and they took it back to the Mediterranean world. The Phoenicians were the greatest seafarers in the world, and they were being subcontracted out by kings such as the pharaohs of Egypt. And just as that history has been suppressed by the mainstream archaeology, so too is the truth that Vikings came here centuries prior to the voyages of Christopher Columbus. So, in my research into this topic, I went to Alexandria, Minnesota to visit what is called the Kensington Runestone, which I'll talk about more in a minute. And I also went to Moorhead, Minnesota, where I saw a full on replica of of a Viking longship, the type of ship that would have been used to travel across the medieval world and even to come to North America. Now, the Kensington Runestone is a runestone that was discovered in 1898 by a Swedish immigrant to Minnesota named Olaf Ullman. His family found the runestone on their family farm while they were working on their property, and they discovered that this was, in fact, a Norse artifact because of the runes that were found on it. Ullman, some of his family members, and even one of his neighbors would sign a legal affidavit saying that they found it in their yard the exact way they would claim. And this is a significant part of the story because of the fact that not long after they discovered the runestone, Orthodox scholars of the archaeological establishment accused Ullman of forging the stone. The stone was claimed to be a hoax. It was, and this claim is rested primarily on two pieces of argument, two lines of argumentation. They've claimed that the runes on the stone are not authentic to the time period because this is claimed to be a 14th century stone. And the second line of argumentation was there were ad hominem attacks on Ullman himself that he hoaxed or forged the stone. But Ullman and his family, even though their reputation suffered greatly and that they were ridiculed and mocked by their neighbors and fellow townsfolk, he never changed his story, and they stayed true to their story all throughout the world, or all throughout Ullman's life, even though even his children suffered and even one of his children committed suicide. I'm going to read a portion here from the book The Lost Colonies of America by Frank Joseph, and he speaks about the Kensington Runestone, and this is what he has to say on it. So, first he speaks about the denial. This man named Breda, he said, although a professor of Scandinavian languages and literature, Breda's runic knowledge was limited, but that deficiency did not prevent him from proclaiming Ullman's discovery to be a transparent hoax. Breda was supported by Norway's leading archaeologist of the late 19th century, Olaf Rigg, and his colleagues at Northwestern University in Evanston, Illinois. Their unanimous dismissal of the Minnesota runestone was based entirely on its error-ridden facsimile and ruined Ullman's life in an era when a man's word was truly his bond. Olaf and his son Edward, who first noticed the runes on the monolith uprooted by his father and their neighbor Fells Flatten, an eyewitness at the time to their discovery, had each sworn affidavits of their memories of the day the object was found 11 years before. Now, here's another significant piece of information coming next. It says Olaf never tried to profit from the runestone, often cursed the day he found it, and swore he told the whole truth about its discovery unto the hour of his death on August 27, 1935, at 80 years of age. He came to hate the artifact so much he threw it into the dirt near his home for use as a backdoor step. And when Norse scholar Hjalmar Holland offered to purchase the runestone, Ullman gladly parted with it for a pittance, $25, the only money he ever made off his reluctant discovery. With the family reputation ruined, Olaf was shunned and mocked by society to the extent that his daughter Manda committed suicide. Although orthodox archaeologists and linguists continued to brand the Kensington Runestone as fraudulent, a geologist at the Minnesota Historical Society, Newton Horace Winchell, undertook a detailed physical analysis of the object for the first time. His tests immediately underscored Ullman's version of events, as particularly confirmed by weathering on the stone's exterior, which indicated that its inscription was not made during the 19th century, but could only have been carved about 500 years before. There was strong support for an authentic runestone date of 1362. Winchell concluded there was little reason to suspect fraud. So this testimony claims what happened, that Ullman in 1898, he found the stone. He stuck by his story all throughout his life. He never tried to profit from it financially, and he never tried to gain fame or glory for it. And even in his willingness to stay honest to the truth, he was willing to suffer tremendously for his discovery. So that's really the story of the discovery of the Kensington Runestone. Now, the truth of the Kensington Runestone is that it is a 14th century tablet, runestone, and its inscription tells a story of a Norse expedition that was in that section of Minnesota in the 14th century, and that it tells this tale of this expedition of around 30 men who were exploring the area and fishing in the area, etc. Now, that's the story of events that have been told. Now, what needs to be understood is that this information has been suppressed by the archaeological establishment, and that ever since the 19th century, there has been a bias and even an agenda to suppress any history in North America that does not line up with the theory of isolationism. Isolationism is the theory that was put forward by the Smithsonian Institute by a man named Powell, who, in this theory, claims that the great civilizations of history grew up largely independent of each other, and especially in regards to the civilizations in the Old World and the New World. In other words, any evidence that supports the idea that civilizations reached the New World before Columbus, that history has been suppressed. I've seen this multiple times at this point, just as I saw it in my expedition to Michigan investigating the ancient copper mines, and I see it here in regards to the Viking expedition to North America. Now, that being said, there's a number of arguments that can be made in favor of the legitimacy of the Kensington Runestone. Now, the first thing we need to understand is that there has been sufficient proof to show that the Vikings were in North America long before Columbus. We already know that there were Viking settlements on Iceland and on Greenland, and there has even been a 14th century runestone found on the west coast of Greenland called the Kingit Tursak runestone. And this tablet was found on the west coast of Greenland. And we also know that there have been Viking settlements found in Canada and in places such as Newfoundland and Baffin Island, even though these archaeological discoveries have been suppressed. For example, there was an archaeologist by the name of Dr. Sarah Parkick who was doing archaeological work in Canada, and she had brought forth many discoveries relating to Viking settlement in that region. But then her credibility was questioned, her work was suppressed, and she eventually transferred her work. She transferred her work to working on Egyptology in Egypt, and she moved on with her career after she was stonewalled into pursuing Norse expeditions. And she even gave a TED talk on Viking settlements in Canada. So that's really interesting. And then a Dr. Pat Sutherland discovered Viking settlements on Baffin Island. Now that's in the far north of Canada. So these type of things we already know from this that there were Viking settlements in North America. When I was in Moorhead, Minnesota doing research for this, I discovered this book called Vikings: The North Atlantic Saga. And even though you can't see it on camera, there's a great deal of information on Viking settlements in Newfoundland and in Canada, as well as in Greenland. We also know from Norse text that there was a Viking settlement in North America that was called Vinland. And Vinland, the location of Vinland has been questioned by historians and by scholars. It's likely somewhere near the bay that leads to the St. Lawrence River and into the Great Lakes region, but that is still debated among scholars. So these things they lend themselves toward the credibility of Viking settlements in North America. Now, in regards to the runestone itself, I personally am not a expert on runestones, but I did in my research. I discovered that there was a man named Dr. Richard Nielsen, and he did an in-depth linguistics analysis of the Kensington Runestone, and he wrote a 75-page paper in 2001 defending its credibility. And I'll even have some excerpts from the footage I'm going to show today where it supports that. When I was at the museum in Alexandria, the Kensington Runestone Museum, that evidence was brought forth and it was shown. And that was very helpful because they gave examples from the runes on the runestone, how they could only have been written in the 14th century, and that some of the knowledge of those runes was not available in 1898, which would have made it essentially impossible to forge or hoax. So that was very helpful as well. And then we need to understand that today, when this is taught in the history books, the Kensington Runestone, it's always claimed that it's almost universally known to be a hoax among scholars. And that's a great example of what's called the tyranny of the experts. They'll say all experts agree that this is a hoax without giving any legitimacy. But this does not lend to the truth that there have been scholars in the past and today that still support the legitimacy of the runestone. For example, in 1907, there in the University of Wisconsin historian named Hjalmar Holland, I read a portion of him in the book The Lost Colonies of America. When he examined the runestone in 1907, he believed that it was authentic and legitimate, and he defended it for the entirety of his life. And in 1910, when a team from the Minnesota Historical Society examined it, they also supported the authenticity of the runestone. So all of this really shows that there is much reason to believe that it is authentic. It is one of the great archaeological finds of the 20th century, and it has been suppressed by the mainstream archaeological establishment, just as truths about the giant mounds in North America have been suppressed. Ancient colonies in North America has been suppressed. We are living in an age where the archaeology and true history of North America is being suppressed because the truth is being hidden from the public, because there are people in high levels of academic prestige and in political power who believe it's in your best interest not to know the truth. So all that being said, guys, I'm going to be showing some of the footage that I did investigating the Kensington Runestone and the truth of Vikings in America. I hope you enjoy the rest of this footage. Hey guys, this is Joe Harper with Reformed Truther Ministries. In today's video, we are going to be investigating the mysteries of Vikings in America. I am in Alexandria, Minnesota today to investigate what is called the Kensington Runestone. Now, for those of you who do not know, the Kensington Runestone was a stone which had runes on it, and it was discovered on the property of a Scandinavian immigrant named Olaf Ullman. And he discovered the runestone in 1898 on his property, and it has caused a great deal of controversy throughout the years. And he found this stone. He never profited from this stone. He never really attempted to profit from this stone. He wasn't looking for fame. He wasn't looking for riches. And even throughout his life, his reputation suffered because scholars accused him of intentionally hoaxing the stone and creating it and creating the rune stones on it. But what most people don't understand is that the Kensington Runestone is potentially one of the greatest archaeological finds in the United States, because it points to the fact that Vikings were here in North America far earlier than the voyages of Columbus, and the first one being in 1492. The Kensington Runestone is a 14th century runestone, and there's a lot of evidence that many people do not know that supports the legitimacy of this runestone. So we're going to be looking at that today. I got the big Ole, the Viking giant, behind me. So we're going to be going to the museum, we're going to be investigating the runestone, and we're going to be seeing what evidence we can uncover to show that the Kensington Runestone is not a hoax, it's not a forgery, but that it is an intentional, true artifact from a 14th century Norse expedition to the United States. So we'll stay in touch. We'll see what we find today. Here we have the actual Kensington Runestone itself, the very one that was discovered in 1898 by Olaf Ullmann. You can clearly see on it the Viking rune inscriptions and from the 14th century, and you can see that this stone, it suffered some weathering, but nonetheless this is the very stone that was discovered in the 19th century. It dates back far earlier to the 14th century, to the Norse expedition to this region of Minnesota. In these two pictures that I took here from the Kensington Runestone Museum in Alexandria, they actually show a couple of the runes, and even though the quality of the pictures didn't come through as well as I would have hoped, you can still see the runes. And the argument that they were making in the museum, based off the linguistic research of Dr. Richard Nielsen, who I mentioned at the beginning of the video, is the argument that was being made is that the knowledge of runes that we have now in the modern day would show that these runes are authentic on the tablet, because if you were living in 1898, you would not have had the knowledge of the runes that we now have. So it would have been essentially impossible for Olaf Ullmann to forge or hoax the runes, and that's the linguistic research of Dr. Nielsen, and that argument was being made as shown in these pictures in the museum. So that's what's being shown here. So here we have the Kensington Runestone historical marker. This is a replica of the actual Kensington Runestone, and it's a lot bigger than the actual runestone. It's about 5 times larger, but when you look at it, you can get a good picture of what it would look like. You have the runes on it, and then this historical marker, it says clearly the Kensington Runestone would date to 1362 in the 14th century. It's a historical marker, and this is cool here. If you go to this part right here, you have the inscription of what the runestone would say in English. On the front of the stone, we are 8 Swedes and 22 Norwegians on an exploring journey from Vinland and through the west. We had a camp by a lake with 2 rocky islands. 1-day trip north from this stone. We were out and fished one day. After we came home, we found 2 of our men red with blood and dead. Ave Maria, save us from evil. And then on the side of the stone, we have, to our party by the sea to look after our ships in day trips from the island, and it's got the date of the year 1362. So we got to remember that if Norse explorers, Swedish or Norwegian explorers, came here in 1362, this would have been in the Christian era, after Christianity had come to Scandinavia. It would no longer be pagan, and that's just really fascinating to see all that. I'm standing in front of
the Kensington Runestone historical marker, which is essentially a giant replica of the original Kensington Runestone. And a moment ago, I just read the inscription in English, which says that this group of explorers, around 30 men, give or take, that they were on an expedition to this area of the United States from Vinland. And Vinland is a settlement in North America that we know existed because it shows up in the Norse text that we have from Scandinavia. Historians are pretty much in universal agreement that Vinland was a real settlement in North America. And it's not arbitrary that settlers would have come to this region of Minnesota, because we're in an area of the country where we're very centrally located to a lot of waterways. If you take the Red River, which is very close to here, you can eventually get up to Lake Winnipeg, and from there you can find your way all the way out to Hudson Bay, which is probably the most likely waterway that they used. But in this area in Minnesota, you're also close to the Great Lakes, which leads you back out to the Atlantic Ocean. And then you have the Mississippi River, which goes all the way down to the Gulf of Mexico, even though it's less likely that they would have used that particular waterway. But if they were exploring this area, or perhaps even settling this area, it makes sense, because this would be a central location for exploration and even potential trade, because all of these waterways converge in this part of the continent here in Minnesota, and that would mean it would be an ideal location to go off into other places. And we know that the Vikings and the Norse, going all the way back to the 9th century, were great explorers and traders. They went up and down the rivers of Russia. They even found their way all the way down to Constantinople. They found their way to the Mediterranean. They sailed around France and Spain into the Mediterranean, and they obviously explored England. They crossed the Atlantic Ocean. They found their way to North America. So these were great seafaring people. These were great explorers, and it shouldn't surprise us that they would end up in a location such as the one we're standing here today in Alexandria, Minnesota. Right now we are at the Ullman family farm. This is the actual site where the runestone was, where it was discovered, where it was located. It was on this property. Today, this area has been turned into a park, and there's a visitor center, and there's some purpose of letting the public still remember this history. Obviously, the house has been kept up and maintained by the city and by the people who own it. But we see here behind me, there's another replica of the runestone and the family farm. But yeah, this entire area, this is built on the site where the runestone was located. This really fascinating historical discovery that is been really buried and suppressed. And if it hasn't been for people who have kept up the truth, that it would have been lost to history. So this is really neat that we're standing in the place where this runestone was actually located. We're on the final leg of our journey here. We are in Moorhead, Minnesota at the Hedgemkosk Center here in Moorhead, Minnesota. And at this location, there is a full-on, full-size replica of a Viking longship. So we're going to be able to see what a Viking longship would have looked like, the type of ships that these Vikings used to travel all over the world, including to North America, and maybe would give us an idea of what the ships they would have used to coming to a place even as far down as Minnesota, traveling south from the Hudson Bays to the Red River and to Alexandria, Minnesota, where we were before. So this should be exciting as we see this longship. So here we have the longship that I was talking about before, and obviously there's some modern signs on the side of it, but other than that, this is a completely authentic Viking longship that the Vikings would have used to travel across the world. It's a lot bigger than you would imagine when you see it up close, so that's really something to see. All right, everybody, we've come to the end of our journey. We are once again finishing our journey here in Alexandria, Minnesota. We investigated Alexandria and the Kensington Runestone Museum. We went to Moorhead, Minnesota, and saw the Viking longship there. So I think we found a lot of compelling evidence to show that the Vikings really did come deep into North America, even into this region of Minnesota, and that really the efforts to discredit those theories are nothing more than the theories of isolationism that have historically been put forward by scholarly institutions such as the Smithsonian or similar academic institutions. They do not want people to understand the truth that civilizations from other parts of the world have come to North America prior to the discoveries of Columbus. And one way we could put it in actuality, when you understand the truth of history, is that Columbus was last. He wasn't first, he was last. And we've seen this time and time again. So I think we found a lot of compelling evidence to show that just as the Phoenicians came here based on the evidence we found in Michigan with the copper mines, we see once again that the Vikings came to North America, and that we've seen that evidence from the Kensington Runestone and the other evidence that we've gathered in this video. So stay tuned, guys, with what's next with Reformed Truth Through Ministries. This is Joe Harper. God bless, guys.
If you enjoyed this video, then check out our website at www.reformedtruther.com.